That one, I don't think it's as loud.
I do feel like I'm on a home shopping.
Yeah, right. We're gonna raffle some prizes off.
Come up and talk about the TV.
Well, you gotta get the interest of your crowd first, so we'll throw some prizes at it and we'll go from there. Well, thanks for joining us today. We wanted to kick things off and talk a little bit about some of the things we're working on together. But I wanted to before we dig in too far, M&A has been a big niche market for us. It was something that kind of happened by accident. Just happened to be something that we're good at because there's a lot of chaos involved and you have to move fast and it's a lot of dynamics around executing M&A. But the important thing is, for our audience, we thought, well, maybe this topic wouldn't be as pertinent. But when we started looking at all of our customer base, we realized that half the room is already involved with some serious M&A. And the M&A we've worked on is really about divestitures and carve-outs from major organizations that, you know, if you have a $1 billion company and they don't have an IT all of a sudden. So, but what needs to happen in M&A and the questions that come up in terms of management, I think begin to shape a little bit of the future that we're all dealing with right now. Onkar has been kind enough to fly in from Colorado today. He is the CIO of Miller Heiman, soon to be named something else, but in reality, Onkar works for the private equity firm that owns these organizations called Providence Equity. So I want to introduce Onkar. He comes from a background previous to this from being the general manager of the business service group at Avaya, which you had P&L responsibility for a $2 billion division. And before that, other Avaya, I forget all of it is, but I want to introduce you and welcome you today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jim. Let's do a quick introduction, give you my background, and then I'm sure Jeff's going to find me with a bunch of questions.
Yes, I am.
We'll set the context from there. So I part of Providence Equity's holding company, and we have a number of different training and learning companies that we've been acquiring over the past year. So far we're at 9, 2 in the last few months, and we have an M&A strategy that's going to continue probably for the next 3 or 4 years. You may have heard some of the companies. Miller Heiman is one of them. It's a big sales, so I'm doing a bit of a plug here. Miller Heiman is largely around sales training, and most salespeople worth the salt have probably been on Miller Heiman training. Another company you may have heard of is ESI, ES International. They do project management, PMI training, and there's various other companies like that. Some of them are affiliated with Stanford University. So prior to this joining, I did come from Avaya. I ran the services business, which is largely around the channel distribution of all of our services within Avaya, as well as running the contact center business. And I was the CTO there for a while on the contact center side of the business. So that's my brief background, and I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. You know, one thing that I wanted to bring up before we dig in, I did a little research. We talked briefly about this before, but I did a little research on Providence Equity's portfolio. And I think I surprised you when I saw Ironman is actually owned by Providence Equity. So Ironman, if you've done a race, or there's many people in this room that have, believe it or not, or participated. And so that brand is actually owned. You guys just divested Auto Trader. And the big surprise was you own SunGuard.
Yes.
Which I was stunned by, because I thought, what are you doing with that? How did we get into this thing if SunGuard? So I think that when I discovered that, I caught you off guard. I'm like, well, how did we, beat out SunGuard? And so I was very curious as to
why RKON?
Yeah, why RKON? Because you've got a provider in there, and we've competed against them many times. So.
Right.
I was curious as to how that got started, and did that come up in the process, and how are we here today?
It did. So I'm going to set a little background context on some of the thought process. One, when we, from a private equity standpoint, when you're looking at setting up a holding company with lots of different companies, the decision on who do you go with is largely based down to the CIO. At the end of the day, you're accountable. It's up to you. Whatever decisions you make, you live and die by. I mean, that's the reality of it. But there's other things that come into play too. So some of the decision process for me was, what size and scale company are we today, and what is our acquisition growth going to look like within 3 or 5 years, and then how do I scale, and who do I want to bring with me on that journey? Now, SunGard has been there, and I'm sure they do a great job. I haven't personally experienced their work overly. But I'm looking for a managed service provider. I'm looking for someone who's going to help grow with me and also manage to handle the changes that are going to happen. My strategy within this group of companies is not going to be based on a 3 or 5 year plan necessarily. It is short term. And short term doesn't mean to say that you throw everything away and it's all disposable necessarily. What it means is I know for a fact in 6 months' time to a year's time the world is going to change. 18 months' time is going to change again. 24 months' time is going to change again. I know that. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that's going to happen. So one of the criteria is who do you work with that can handle the change, and who can change with us. So I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, SunGard wouldn't necessarily do that, but we're a certain size and scale of a company, and I think when you partner up with a company that has similar kind of methodology behind who they are and how they want to grow, so it's not just about the service that they're offering, but where are you going as a company, and how are you growing, and how are you going to get there? I think early on I sort of delved into that with you and asked you some of these questions about where are you going to go with your organization, and there was a good pairing, and that's one of the reasons, one of the primary reasons now. Obviously you do your reference checks, you do all the background research, you've got to make sure that the day-to-day stuff is there and you're competent, but at the end of the day the decision was made on can you grow and adapt at the same rate and pace that we need for our business. And that was the fundamental. So
I'm glad in hindsight that I didn't know that SunGard was our competition, but
and they're
probably,
still there.
Yeah, I know they are. It's a good sword to hang over our head. You talked a little bit about decision model, and I think that's the thing that struck me when we've talked and when we look at decisions that you folks are making and other of our clients making. The old school was economies of scale, standardization, and reduce costs. And what we're seeing more and more is maybe that model doesn't necessarily apply to not only the M&A market, but the general market. How do you view decision making on big things? What projects to take? What's your criteria?
So a few things that are different way of thinking, I guess, is when we look at some of the M&As, knowing that the M&A world, we're going to carry on doing these acquisitions, they're going to happen. You can't internalize IT, and we're all sort of negligent to some point of doing that, and you forget the company's strategy and where they're going. Now, that company strategy may be, hey, we're going to grow and just drive organic growth, and then at some point we're going to do an IPO, we're going to exit in some way, or we might sell a piece of the company, or we acquire another company, and the growth comes through an M&A growth. But you know that change is going to be constant. Now, not to say you can't internalize IT, because you do. I have 4 kind of foundation goals to build trust, and they're deliver on time, deliver in full, make sure you deliver what you're going to deliver on quality, and make sure that the quality is always going to be there, and deliver the scope that you set out that you're going to originally deliver on. So that builds trust, which is fine, but it's all internal. You make sure the lights are on, and half of my team turn around and say the best days we have is when no one talks to us. Quiet and peace and quiet in IT is the applause that you will never hear.
How many days like that have you had since you
We haven't had many of them days. Today's not one of
we
them.
haven't either. We're on the other side of it.
So you have this internal view of IT, but in reality, when people are sitting around the boardroom or they're sitting making decisions at the C-level, they turn around and saying, what does cash flow look like? How predictable is it? Is it a CapEx or an OpEx? So am I going to be spending out on capital outlay or an OpEx? Do I have the ability to move from a capital outlay to an OpEx? These are the trigger points that in reality filter down, and then you're sat there and saying, what do you mean? I've got to cut budget and I've got to do something else, and so I'm cutting budget, that's the answer. And when really, no, the question was, I'm trying to grow a business, I want to grow 2 or 3 times the size I am now, I want predictability. Doesn't necessarily mean you cut costs, but if you're not at the table up front telling me what the future is and where you're going, with IT and how it's going to help the business grow to that level, then the first thing I'm going to come back to you is say, cut costs, synergies. Because when I do an M&A, one of the triggers in that M&A is synergy, which is a cost reduction. And they're in every M&A.
Right.
You know, you buy a company on, you look at it, you look at the book value of that company, you say, this is a great deal, we're going to buy this company. But in reality, you also say, hey, can I save some money? Yeah, sure, where? IT is an obvious place to look.
And it's to the point where they don't even look at the details. They have standard formulas that they apply and say, you can expect to save 5%, let's not worry about how.
Right, right. The high-level view, and you know, it is so high-level at some instances that you know, you're amazed at how the numbers are calculated in the first place. Like, we're doing a transition, we're doing an M&A, there is so much change that's about to happen in the organization, and yet we're going to reduce at 5 or 10% somewhere along the line. You know, do people care? Absolutely they care. But the reality is ours to go and manage from that point forward. So knowing that from day one, knowing that you've got an M&A, you plan for that 5%, 10% cut. So right now on day one, year one for me, I am planning for a 5% or 10% cut next year. I'm planning for a 20% cut the year after. I already know that with the investments that I've made in IT today. So you could say, well, you're over-investing. Yes. But this goes to the next premise of the M&A, which is when you take on an M&A, you want everything to be quiet, normal, working, no downtime. You want all of that to happen. You've got to over-invest. But over-invest with a view that you're going to actually stream down your costs on a regular basis within a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year period. Secondly, knowing that change is going to happen probably every 14, 16 months down the line, you're going to have that change as well. So that cut down in cost is actually going to be reapplied to your business, your IT business, in a year's time. So you're not actually, I don't view it as a world where you're sitting there and say, I'm going to reduce cost out of my infrastructure and get down to the bone. I actually think I'm going to take money back out of IT to reinvest back into IT, even though no one says that and no one talks about it. In reality, that's what's going to happen. So I know the world is going to change in 14 months.
I know you're looking at me, talking to me, but I feel like you're negotiating right now about.
I am.
I just want to make that clear.
You know what my mind is.
I do. So along that line, how do you know, there's a myriad of projects, right? You look at the list of things that need to be fixed, and we all have them. It's an endless list of, you know, you'll never actually fix everything. What's your criteria for figuring out what you're going to attack and what you're going to leave alone, knowing that your world's going to change in 6 months to a year? And we've all been through it. The largest of public companies have, you know, been bought, merged, bankrupted, come out. I mean, it's just there is no such thing as stability anywhere now. And so, how does that affect your, you know, how do your decision making of what to even work on?
Sure.
Because you waste your time on something that becomes irrelevant a year from now, you've lost, that's where your cost goes. You could have worked on something that was more tangible. How do you pick those things? And how do you get your management to buy in that those are the priorities?
Well, there's 3 layers within the organization, certainly my organization. I know many of you probably have different layers on this. The first one is literally go for the silence. You know, everything has to work, keep the lights on, make sure that everything is working, go for the silence. And a lot of people understand that. They'll go about their day-to-day business and keep everything quiet. The second layer is around relationships and relationship building. Totally different type of person. And they're really working with the business day in, day out, trying to understand what their priorities are, competing priorities. A lot of these M&As will have, like in our instance, will have, you know, each one will have a CEO. And they're all competing in a shared IT service model. So you've got to have the ability to establish those relationships and understand their priorities, which are important. Then you have the third layer. And the third layer is top-down driven, and that third layer is very, very strategic. So what are those priorities? Those tend to be around, okay, I want consistent cash flow. I want to have a funnel that I can predict, so I know what orders are coming into the business on a regular basis. You know, I want to know how much cash is left at the end of the year, so I can do another M&A at some point. I want to have that predictability that you can drive, and that's the priority. So you take on an M&A, and suddenly you've got 2 ERP systems. You got, you know, 2 CRM. I just found a CRM system yesterday in Germany, one of our companies that had done an M&A themselves 3 years ago and never got around to integrating that, and so we.
Or tell you about it.
Or tell us about it. So we just, you know, discovered that and part of the M&A. So you have all of these inconsistencies that are driven, and they drive to the point whereby you don't know, from an investment point of view, can I go in and invest in my next M&A, because it's not predictable. I don't know what's coming out of IT. All of a sudden this huge expenditure comes out and we don't know where it came from. So you've got these three different levels. The priorities are driven from strategic point of view is, we've got to drive the company strategy, and the company strategy, if it's organic growth, is one thing. So you've got to have a clean funnel, you've got to know where the orders are coming from. If it's an M&A strategy, then it's the case of got to have the cash flow predictability there. We've got to make sure our ERP systems are stable. We've got to make sure that finance is getting what they need, not so that they can run the day-to-day business, but they can report out so we know where we can go next with the money. That's what becomes important. It's a very different set of priorities. It's not internalized in IT in any way. The relationship side really comes down to the second layer is managing across multiple different entities and coming back and saying, okay, that aside, because quite frankly the CEOs may not care about that.
Right.
How do I make sure that my business unit is kept happy, and what are their priorities? And that is a day-to-day kind of issue. I'd love to say there was an easier model, but there never is. Good days and bad days, but that is a day-to-day yin-yang kind of relationship that goes on. And that's built on the fact that you've got trust, and the trust comes from silence. Everything is running from one day to the next, and I'm not getting bothered by all these minutiae of issues that come up because someone can't get to a network, or someone doesn't have their applications available to them. And for me, and one of the reasons, circling back, is why we picked RKON as well, is that day-to-day piece of business is not as important to me. It is number 3 on the priority list for me, that day-to-day business. Why? It just doesn't help me grow in any way. It doesn't help me with my first priority, which is keep consistency and allow me to do more M&As. It doesn't necessarily help with my second one, which is actually keep the business priorities in check as well, because they're looking for value-driven applications which sit on top of the infrastructure. They don't care about the infrastructure.
Right.
I don't think they ever will, and why should they? I never used to when I was in the buyer. I don't care about the infrastructure. It's got to work. End of story. And then you've got that final layer, like I said, and that layer is where you say, what am I going to do with that? Do I need to keep that in-house? Do I need to get rid of it? Do I need to outsource it? Can I manage it internally as a cost? To be quite frank, we make decisions, so I have as well in my past made decisions where you look at it and think, that's the most important thing. But then you realize, hang on a second, everything's going to change in 12 months' time. So how much value am I going to put on that when I know in 12 months it's going to change?
Right.
So where does my value actually sit? It sits in layer 2, it sits in layer 3. That first layer is the most important to me because I get the most headache out of that layer,
right,
but it's the least impactful.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about every organization has a different view on what they want to control and what they want to have in-house. You had shared some experience with me about why you would not build a data center again, and I thought that was interesting. But when you got into this, that was the last thing you wanted to do, was own and operate a data center. What was the thinking? What was your experience in doing that? And there are reasons for doing it, so I'm not trying to talk everybody out of it, but you had an interesting experience about the investment and what ended up happening in the long run.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's always reasons to do something and not. I'm giving you one perspective. It's just a perspective, and you take it for what it's worth. But prior to joining Avaya, I worked with a company called Convergys, and I think you got Comcast in the role. Is that right? Yes, Comcast. So did a lot of work with Comcast. In fact, I think still does a lot of work with Comcast. So I'm going to be careful what I say now. So I ran IT. I was the CIO kind of running in Europe, had all international, and Convergys is a BPO outsourcer of contact centers globally. This is going back, before outsourcing was anything really. So we sat there and made the decision, and I was the European CIO. We had an international one. We had a bunch of CIOs all pretending we're doing something at the time. And our global CIO came back and said, hey, you know what, we're going to build our own data center. We're going to put it in Milton Keynes in the UK, and we're going to establish our European head office base there. It's like, great, we did everything. Best of fire suppression, raised floors that you could live under. We had the whole work, rack space like you couldn't believe. And then about 9 months later, we took we won a huge client, probably half of our business, and it was all offshore. Everything was. And we sat there, and I remember the conversation at the time. It's like, okay, did we not know that we were going to go? We're a BPO, we're an outsource company. Did someone not think about the fact that we're going to go offshore at some point with technology, and our entire client base, etc., etc. It's like, yeah, we did, but we just thought we'd push everything into the UK and run all of our apps there. So now we're investing in Citrix. We've got Singtel with our bandwidth issues, and someone cut some lines to the Philippines, and all of these other problems sort of emerged that we set upon ourselves, and we didn't have it. So what do you do next? Bring everything back in, or you say, I've got an idea. We'll build another data center over there, because surely that is the answer, is to build another data center.
That's right.
Yeah, it's an actual way to go, surely. And then you think, okay, that's going to happen. So, all right, we've got a huge growth plan. Business is booming. Outsourcing was going up through. Every company wanted to outsource people. So it's all right, we can build another data center. Now, this actually happened so you build one, and then what happens 5 years later? Egypt, that's where we need to be. Romania is where we need to be. The Eastern Bloc is the new outsourcing mecca of the world. That's where we need to be. So what do? Start to build another one, or push that back to the UK and your apps roll? I mean, it's just a never-ending cycle of change strategically. And I don't know if you have all noticed, but since 2008, 2009, everyone went into a quiet period and started to, all the PEs started to get the money in-house and keep it all. There wasn't a lot going on. Everyone was worried about where the economy was going, and everyone started to internalize on the business and focus on their core clients because they were losing so much money. And then they came out of that. Next thing that happened is, okay, we got money, the economy seems to be better, buy. I mean, and that cycle has not stopped.
No.
It's just been constant change.
Yeah.
So, change is something that, you can never predict what it's going to do, but, you got to understand that our core business when we were in Convergys wasn't a data center. That wasn't driving value to our customers at the end of the day. Certainly isn't in the case now that we've got, and we know change is going to be a constant, so.
How do you maintain that core strategy? We talked a little bit about what's your strategy for making sure that the core team that delivers value to the business internally doesn't get tied up in other things? I mean, that was a little bit about the driver on essentially outsourcing some of these mundane, repetitive, I mean, it's why people ultimately go to the cloud. It is one driver. What about the whole loss of control and that's a trade, right?
It is absolutely a trade. You can sit there and I'm sure everyone has at some point. You draw your Venn diagrams and you overlay, who you're working with, and say, okay, this is the gray area where the two circles overlap, and that's the relationship I need that really locked down in order to keep my control. For me, control is a number of things. One of the reasons why I picked RKON is selfishly. I know when I turned around and asked you how big of a client are we going to be of yours, you said in our top 10. And for me, that's the right answer.
Yeah.
And I want to be in your top 10 client base. And I know it's a relationship.
I tell that to everybody. There's 100 people in this room that think they're in my top 10.
That's good on that. Now I have to go and check. No.
Just don't talk to anybody.
But that plays a lot into how relevant am I to you?
Right.
Right. Relevancy is so important.
Yes.
Because everyone, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're internal or you're external, you're outsourcing, is going to view their work with a relationship of relevancy to whoever they're working for. Right. And that relationship hasn't really changed. Whether you go internal or you go external, the problem's the same. I mean, I can rely on someone internally or externally in the same way. It's just, what leverage do I have over them internally or externally? Horrible thing to say, but that's what people think. It's like, am I accountable to you or not? And that accountable relationship is what is key to me. So what I found, certainly with RKON, and we work with a number of different suppliers, by the way. RKON's not the only one. We have a number of different ones working on, ERP systems, CRM systems, cloud-based for email, box for storage. I mean, we've gone completely cloud and managed service across the board. What I found with RKON is that we have a very responsive team. So the layer 1, keep my noise quiet so I can focus on layer 2 and layer 3. You're taking care of layer 1. The minute you don't take care of layer 1, we have a discussion, right? I mean, same as everyone else.
You have a discussion.
Yes. Usually the other way around, right?
I'll be there to support you, though.
And that said, the good news is, I don't want to be the one instigating the discussion. And what I have found, and why it works well is, you're instigating, Troy's instigating the discussion with me. I'm getting forewarned of my problems beforehand because I want to focus on layer 2 and layer 3, which is the relationship and the strategic aspect, and not necessarily layer 1. So that has really come into play for me, and I think it's one of the primary reasons. Can you go internal? Sure, you can. Go internal, hire your people, build an RKON equivalent, and go and do it yourself. Absolutely, you can. Is the company going to really put a value on that at the end of 3 years or 5 years when all these changes are going on and you're worrying about that when you should be worrying about something else? I'll let you decide on that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, IT not necessarily, I think I used the word disposable, and that's how we approach it internally. When we build our next version of our cloud, we're pretty much looking at 24 months. And we know through technology that every year you can buy 30% more, that's going to be 30% faster. And what we're finding is that about every 3 years, we literally can throw away what we bought 3 years ago completely and buy new and have it better, cheaper, faster. And so we're definitely in the disposable mindset in our view, but something interesting, every business sector has emerging leaders, right? And really M&A, to us, is becoming an early adopter of the cloud, for the reasons that you're talking about, to the point where Forbes has called us CRN. We actually just got interviewed and written up in CRN talking about focusing on M&A. Everybody talks about a vertical. And I said, well, I don't know if we picked M&A or it picked us, but the interviewer said, why? And I said, really, they're the early adopter of what I think the future model is going to be because of this pace of movement and the money being on the sideline. There was some statistic in 08 that there was more money, or 09 I should say, there was more money on the sideline in savings, not just with PE, but Fortune 500. They had more cash than ever in the history ever, and they just weren't spending it because you don't spend when there's no ROI. And once the market came back, the ROI wasn't return on business. The ROI was on what you get from rolling up a big organization and selling it for twice the multiple that you bought it for. But along the way, we kind of noticed that maybe M&A is this new model of this. How well has it worked? From your experience, I know you've gone through different versions of this. How much anxiety do you have over, well, I can't do anything about this? It's what, has it worked for you?
So,
there's got to be downsides.
Yeah, there is absolutely downsides. So here's what doesn't work. And I know all of you in this room probably have felt this. What doesn't work is that second layer, the prioritization. Doesn't always get to where it needs to be for that second layer. I'm running my individual business unit, here's my set of priorities. Yes, fine, the company's going where it's going to go and they're trying to drive synergies and grow, but I don't care about that. I'm looking at 6 months, I'm looking at today, I'm looking at tomorrow, and that prioritization. So where it fails is the whole kind of, I don't want to go to a shared service model, I want to go for my, the guy that I tug on the shoulder and the person that's always there. I want that prioritization. I want to feel like I'm the most important thing in the world to you, right? Because right now I don't feel like that. That's where it always fails. Always fails. Always will fail. And and it comes down to individuals. Some people can see the bigger picture and some people can't. But in reality, our job is to make sure that both sides of it, all three layers are satisfactorily met. You mentioned the disposable model. I look at that from an M&A when we originally built out our network. So everything was new. whether it was email, LAN, ERP system, everything was new. Or we picked one and decided to go in that direction. You talk about disposable. For me, is template. And that template is something that you can change and swap out and put in another template at some point. So when I remember
portable is probably a better word.
Portable.
Yeah.
But so I'll give you an example. I talked to Troy a while ago about LAN in the box, and said I don't want to worry about what's going on in my local network at all. I don't want to worry about it. So build me a LAN in the box. I want to be able to unplug this thing, plug this thing in, because I know I'm going to have numerous M&As. New sites are going to pop up all the time. Do I want to sit there and spend money, time, energy, and have a whole load of problems trying to integrate this network, etc., and deal with all of that? Or do I want to just come along one day, like we did the other weekend in Washington, and just say, LAN in the box, stick it in, I know it's the same configuration, everything works, and turn it on, and my middle layer business unit leader is happy as Larry.
That was the RPOP?
That was our.
Oh, okay. Was that the RPOP one in a box?
No, that's another example.
Okay,
That's another example.
I'm sorry.
So, are you intentionally poking me in that direction?
No, not at all. I was, you guys are more privy than I am. So.
But that's another good example whereby, you look at a whole application set of suites and then you say, okay, I need to move these into a reliable infrastructure somewhere and get security. How do I do it? Well, I want a repeatable model, and your RPOP is basically comes in shadows, mirrors, call it what you like, replicates what we have.
Cloud in a box, and we just drop it in.
Drop it in.
It works.
It works. Pull it back out, stick it in the data center, and no one knows.
Right.
That first layer of silence is there. It's golden.
Yeah.
I love silence.
Well, we have been through many transitions where we tried to go in and fix and stabilize what was there before we changed anything.
Yeah, and you got to remember when you do these M&As, typically what happens is, some level in the C-suite will sit there and say, okay, I've got a target I've got to hit by the end of the year. When we did this acquisition, we agreed on a target, and it's going to be a nice little, earner for the company or individuals or whatever. So there's some kind of incentive there. So we got this M&A, we got this target at the end of the year, and we got a revenue target that not only are the C-suite is kind of focused on, but also it's because the equity firm or the backing firm has sat there and said, I want to achieve this kind of growth to show that we can have continuous growth. The last thing that they want is any disruption.
Right.
None. I mean, you don't want. Unfortunately.
If IT
it's
doesn't
all
work,
disruption.
it's in the boardroom discussion about why we can't move forward.
Yeah, it's now your number one priority, your number one problem has been, the thing that, quite frankly, we should be spending the least amount of time on, because it should be the least amount of our problems, but it hasn't been.
So how do you sell management on this counterintuitive theory that that quiet is the most important? Because that's collectively our biggest challenge, right? We can't get the leadership to say yes to the right thing to keep it quiet. They want it quiet, but they don't want to spend the money. How do you resolve, right? But we're still accountable. So how do you resolve, what's your approach to resolving that?
Well, there's one aspect of it which is keeping quiet. I also believe that you have to have some value prop in IT which drives the business fundamentally. Whether that's a strategic plan or whatever it happens to be, you've got to have that kind of game-changing value within IT. So, absolutely you've got to drive the quiet, but you've also in layers 2 and 3, through your prioritization process, you've got to come up with, hey, here's something that's going to change your business fundamentally. So it's, what happens, it's a bit of a handshake that goes on. The business will sit there and say, hey, here's the future, here's the value that I want to drive in the future, whether that is for us, a whole digital media world that we're going to drive into to make intuitive learning, or whether it's some other value prop. The fact is, you put a position of a value prop in front of them and say, oh, by the way, I've also got this other stuff to do. This other stuff you don't care about. I know you don't care about it, but it needs to be done. But we're going to do this together. We're not going to be able to do one without the other. They have to go together, because otherwise you cannot maintain the noise that's generated by your problems. You can't control that noise because you've got no other value you're driving. If you don't have any other value, sort of like a redundant relationship. I think my wife would divorce me if I didn't have some value that drove on a little further, you know, just all noise. So it's a partnership, and it works. It works pretty well when people understand that there's two sides to this coin. So that's how we manage it.
Well said. Well, I think our time's up, so I want to thank you very much for your generous time today and for coming in to see us. And unfortunately, we don't have the weather that we normally do at this event, but I think one of our guys came in from Portland and dragged us with him. So yes, we're still blaming you on the inclement weather. So.